It's an old Beijing custom, taking a caged bird for a stroll. So ingrained in Chinese culture has this custom become that the modern Chinese dictionary records a special word for this practice, liao niao. In Beijing, the custom dates back centuries. At first, it was the exclusive preserve of the imperial household, nobility, and high-ranking officials. To begin with, ordinary people were too busy earning a living to take time out of the daily grind to go walk caged birds. But by the late Qing dynasty, as this exhibition shows, the custom had taken hold throughout society. Lao She's novel Tea House draws attention to the practice of this custom in the late Qing dynasty. One of the characters in the novel is a Manchu bannerman called Sung Air, who does nothing but drink tea and look after his birds. After the fall of the Qing dynasty, as he struggles to make ends meet, his birds come to symbolize nostalgia for the old order and his disdain for the new conditions in which he finds himself. And so, taking birds for a walk developed into a byword for idleness. People who took birds for a walk were malingerers, people determined to live off the efforts of others. Nowadays, of course, it's something that ordinary, hard-working people do, particularly those whose working days are behind them, as they can afford to indulge themselves walking their birds. This is Chaoyang District's Hui nationality community. It's home to one of Beijing's largest communities of Muslim Hui people. Every day for the past 20 years, 68-year-old Wu Shuqing has come here to take his birds for a stroll. This is the land Mr. Wu used to farm. Never in his wildest dreams did he think that the site of his back-breaking labours would, one day, be the scene of the serene life of leisure he enjoys today. But recently, Mr. Wu's routine has changed. Now he comes here twice a day. A while ago, his son, who's away on business most of the year, came to stay. Not surprisingly, Mr. Wu neglected his birds in favour of his son. He didn't take them out for a month. Now his favourite bird has lost its appetite and become sluggish, clear symptoms of avian depression. For Mr. Wu, there's only one cure for a depressed bird: more walks. Wood thrushes are the birds favoured by the bird strollers of old Beijing. Mr. Wu has 4 of them. The one which is depressed is called Lao Huang. Mr. Wu's son gave him Lao Huang as a 60th birthday present. At the time, it was just a 2-month-old chick. After more than 8 years, it's hard for Mr. Wu to contemplate being without this bird. Wood thrushes usually live about 15 years. Lao Huang is a middle-aged bird now. Now, the bird is not quite its usual chirpy self, and Mr. Wu is understandably worried. Mr. Wu first hangs the cages of the 2 wood thrushes in the usual place. He takes care to hang Lao Huang and another one further away from the others. Survival of the fittest is the law of existence in the animal world, and wood thrushes are no different. This bird food has been specially prepared by Mr. Wu. For the past 20 years, he's also taken injured and sick birds under his wing. This nutrient-rich meal is just the thing they need to recover and get back into the wild where they belong. The special bird meal is also for Lao Huang and the 3 other wood thrushes. The stronger birds are given bird seed to eat. Once he's finished feeding his feathered friends, the leisurely Mr. Wu takes his ease and waits for an old friend. This is Mr. Wu's friend. Sadly, his friend suffers from glaucoma, which means he can't tolerate bright light. This is why he wears sunglasses. Beijing's bird fraternity have a vocabulary all their own when it comes to their birds. Birds they've just bought are called new birds, whilst birds they've had for a long time are called seasoned birds. The great thing about seasoned birds is that they're used to people. Unlike new birds, they're not easily scared or intimidated, and this means that bird keepers can enjoy a familiarity and intimacy with them that would be impossible with new birds. The Temple of Heaven is one of the most famous places in Beijing. Every day tourists flock here, but every morning between the hours of 7 and 9 o'clock before the tourist buses arrive, the Temple of Heaven belongs to locals, doing their morning exercises and, of course, taking their birds for a walk. It's important to stroll birds on a regular basis, as it helps them to get used to new, unfamiliar environments. Vigorous swinging also helps to break in the new birds and turn them into seasoned ones that feel at ease and chirp cheerfully. The wood thrush is noted for its timid character. It usually takes fright at people, cats and dogs, so it's important to cover the cages containing new birds with blue cloth to reduce the stress they feel out in the open. It usually takes a year to get new birds used to people and the outside world, but once they're relaxed, they chirp freely. There's a special etiquette that governs how people hang their bird cages that dates back to the old days of the Manchu bird strollers. In order to show respect to the people who've had their birds hanging for longer, it's important for newcomers to hang their birds lower and to keep a respectful distance from the other cages. Bird strolling brings birds together and people together. The fluttering of birds' wings and their chirps are the essence of this sociable old Beijing custom. Different people get different things out of bird strolling. Some like the walk, others like meeting, chatting with fellow bird lovers and making new friends. Others just enjoy the chirping and chirruping of the birds. People around here call this fellow the king of birds, and he certainly acts like he rules the roost. When he's here, you can barely hear the other birds above his trilling song. Like a true king, he really knows how to make his voice heard. While some of the bird keepers are clearly proud of their birds, others like to keep a lower profile. This bird keeper hangs up his cage when others have gone. It's not because he's unfriendly or likes to keep himself to himself. He just worries that his bird might pick up some bad habits or nasty chirps from the other birds. He's convinced his bird is a special bird. He's spent 10 years teaching it 10 different chirps. For Mr. Wu, on the other hand, afternoon is the time for mending bird cages. He really doesn't care about the quality of the thrush and the sort of chirp it makes. He just likes these little birds.
上稿的就是学那个夜猫子叫，猫头鹰。一般的人不爱听这个，哎，他说他放人死了，其实没那么回事。 有一般的人就不爱听他这事儿，只要我们这儿回民这个听他没事。
Mr. Wu wants Lao Huang to get better as soon as possible, so he puts him in a new bird cage and hangs it next to the liveliest bird here. A week later, it looks like the influence of the other bird did indeed rub off on Lao Huang. He's rediscovered his chirp. Well, nobody's perfect, and nor are birds. Lao Huang's got into a bad habit.
那就是一开始我闹的时候啊，把别的鸟给砸了，他就出这毛病。他这脑子就老就往上抬吧，他这是毛病，就跟好像跟有一种病似的。太习惯。哎，像这点儿，要是你要一过去吧，他倒没事；你要跟那儿一搁着。 不是他一叫烦了，他就干那个，脑瓜子往前踩脑袋，他等于算次鸟了。他一般的老养鸟的人，就说这鸟就不能要了。
But there are many reasons why Laohuang is Mr. Wu's favorite wood thrush.
他有时候叫唤什么布鸡儿叫唤，布鸟叫唤，什么小狗叫唤，鸡咯咯哒，它都有，它就是声小。它养时间长了，跟它有感情了，等于是吧？
Once a week, Mr. Wu carefully mixes hot and cold water. He checks the temperature with his bare hands as if he's making a bath for a baby. It has to be just right. It's a bath for his beloved Laohuang.
给它洗洗澡，它就好得多。你要是不管它那虱子跟它那个罩子上能打上蛋，一轮子一轮子。
Mr. Wu has his own way of dealing with lice.
开水烫，给它点滴的味，使鸡的味水给它洗了，洗完了把那罩子可以再腾，腾完晒干了可以再给它戴上。你洗完了，它那毛顺溜着呢，干净，捋筛，好看着呢，特别好看。鸟儿它叫了。
Mrs. Wu is glad for her husband's sake that Laohuang's condition has improved, but her interests don't extend to her husband's birds. Recently, she's been more interested in a puzzle her son has sent her.
这个别着急，慢慢玩，这就是玩的。
Mr. Wu continues with his regime of twice-daily walk, and 3 months on, the cloud of depression finally lifts from the bird. Mr. Wu is known all over the Changyinghui community for walking his birds. Everybody knows who he is, and that if you have any questions concerning birds, he's the man to go to. As for the qualities of wood thrushes, Mr. Wu has ideas of his own.
个儿大，围子长，围子宽，长得好看，长得特别什么尾巴呀，什么膀子呀，长得水灵着，好看着呢。有嘴长了，有嘴短了，我说白了就跟那人似的。鼻子有大的，嘴有撅着的，往上一撅的那个，是吧？
This is Guanyuan Bird Market. Since the bird flu epidemic, the number of birds sold here has declined. Most people now come here to buy bird cages or to share their common interest in birds. One thing all bird keepers think they know is that it's impossible to say anything about a wood thrush that doesn't chirp. In fact, you can't even tell male and female wood thrushes apart unless you can hear them chirp. They look exactly the same. As for quality, Mr. Wu maintains that the best birds are the ones that chirp briskly in a resonant voice. The wood thrush comes from southern China. The prices it fetches vary widely. The cheap ones go for a song fetching just a few yuan, but others cost hundreds, with a few premium specimens commanding as much as 1,000. The record is 100,000 yuan. A wood thrush worth that much money must have been something quite remarkable. In the past, Beijingers walked out with all kinds of birds. In fact, you could judge somebody's status by the bird they had. Officials favoured larks, whereas military men went for the thrush. It's said that the officials, all literary men, admired the variety of sounds the lark is able to make, and they could even make out stories and plots in its song. Military men, on the other hand, admired the aggressive territoriality of the wood thrush and the clarity of his chirp. The birds Beijing people raise and walk with are divided into big birds and small ones. Larks and thrushes are big birds, while tits, orioles and canaries are small birds. But whether it's a big bird or a small one, what's important is its chirp, a reminder of the serenity of the natural world amidst the hustle and bustle of city life. People have different reasons for strolling their birds. Some want to keep fit and healthy. Others just enjoy the company of the birds. But for some, it's the realization of a childhood dream. 73-year-old He Zangshan lives in Chaoyang district. 13 years ago, he retired, and since then, he's devoted himself to breeding canaries on his balcony. Da Hong and Xiao Huang have just got together. Da Hong has sired one brood before, but this is Xiao Huang's first time. This is the fruit of their love, 5 little eggs. There are 2 reasons why Mr. He devotes himself to breeding canaries. It's the realization of a childhood dream, and it's a way of improving his life.
到咱们这岁数吧，退休不是吧？一看小鸟儿有点兴趣，是吧？这激发自个儿的这个爱鸟，对鸟的爱护的兴趣，是吧？这样呢，自个儿呢也心情也舒畅了，是吧？所以有点什么事儿呢，喂喂鸟儿啊，和这个听着叫唤呢，这个心态呢就开阔多了。
Da Hong pays close attention to Xiao Huang. Xiao Huang is anxious about her clutch. She knows that the future is uncertain, that anything could happen. Not all of the eggs will hatch, and on the 8th day, an egg falls from the nest. Survival of the fittest, the sad and brutal reality of existence. The fact is that birds often dispose of eggs that they feel are unviable. It gives the others a better chance. Xiao Huang is sad about the egg. Da Hong comforts her, dabbing Xiao Huang's head with his tail feather. Xiao Huang gradually calms down. There are others to think about. Mr. He doesn't breed birds for profit, so he can afford to treat his birds with greater humanity than many bird breeders do. He feels that it's important to keep the males and the females together so that they can enjoy a naturally fulfilling life together. This is at odds with commercial bird breeding practice, in which, in order to maximize egg production, males and females are only permitted to enjoy each other's company when the female is in season. On the 10th day, disaster strikes again. Another egg falls from the nest. Xiao Huang's mood worsens. Now she's neglecting the other eggs. Da Hong tries to do it by himself. Xiao Huang rallies as she doesn't have the heart to let Da Hong do it alone. Canaries are in fact very sensitive creatures. In years gone by, they were used in coal mines to detect gas. Miners would bring the birds down into the mine and hang their cages in the shaft where they were working. If the concentration of gas in the air was too high, the birds would fall silent and drop dead. This meant it was time to get out of the mine. On the 15th day, a 3rd egg is found at the bottom of the cage. Xiao Huang completely freaks out. She gives up on the eggs. Da Hong has had enough. Now he decides to ignore Xiao Huang, and they become estranged. For 20 days, Da Hong tends to the eggs himself, incubating them in the hope they'll hatch. But it's to no avail. He gives up and makes up with Xiao Huang.
哎呀，我给你拿只鸟来，你看看吧。
这鸟还真不错，这鸟哎。
这是刚有2只，孵出2只来，给你拿1只来。上回你不是给我换我1只吗？我就得了，我说给你拿只鸟，你这多一品种，是吧？解解闷儿，充充电，好吧？
这好，这个好，青的跟黄的串的是吧？
对，
还真漂亮串的。
这杂交的叫的比那个纯的好听。
哎，杂交的主要还抗病性强呢，
是吧？
一般咱不爱生病啊。
Mr. He has an old acquaintance. He's 5 years younger than Mr. He. They've long been neighbours, but didn't get on friendly terms with each other until their common interest, canary breeding, brought them together. Mr. He wanted to give him one of Da Hong and Xiao Huang's chicks, but sadly, none of the clutch made it. Mr. He has to choose another chick.
这鸟就是棒。你看这腿儿，这爪儿，这体型，这个儿，
这正好一年，
哎
放量正用，知道吧？是吧？
这鸟这要如果不花的话，当种鸟使真不错。这鸟
得了，先听见，等需要正缺的时候，你就用它的模式，
是吧？
肯定没问题，
你
是吧？
看这板呢，还垫的网，
是吧？
俩板正着底，一点毛病没有。
不成啊，我那德国星要出来，咱们再说，是吧？
咱们互相再找吧，
再
这是不是？
找吧。
While Mr. Hay likes yellow canaries, his friend likes red ones. They often meet to talk about canary breeding. With more than 20 years of experience between them, they each have their own areas of canary breeding expertise and their own ideas about birds in general. Mr. Hay has theories about the cultivation of the wild, instinctive nature of birds. His friend is more interested in remedies for sick birds.
我那鸟啊，有点蔫儿，怎么办呢？
哇，给您出一偏方，您呐喂油料多了，多喂点带皮儿的食，多换换水。
那我现在怎么办呢？
咱们家里有没有那过去的圣药啊？
有。
哎，土霉素，
有。
稍微拿小刀啊，给它刮一点面，搁在水里头。
好，
您喂3天您试试。
Mr. Hay does what his friend advises, and the canary is soon back on his perch, his old chirpy self. The pair are determined canary breeders. That sense of determination invigorates them, and it adds colour to their lives. It's the same for Mr. Wu. Nursing his bird back to health was a real achievement, an experience he can share with other bird lovers. These caged birds really add something to the lives of these retired Beijing gentlemen. Something as sweet as the songs they sing. This is about something that happens in a small village 80 kilometers from Beijing. In the village square, thousands of people enjoy a meal together. It looks chaotic at first sight, but the noise and clamour are signs that people are enjoying themselves.
好吃吗？好吃。OK。
It's the 16th day of the Chinese year. It's odd to find people holding such a big celebration on this day, as strictly speaking, the New Year festivities finished 2 days earlier. This village, lying in the northern part of Beijing municipality's Huairou district, is called Underwillow. Fewer than 300 people live here. One of its inhabitants is Mr. Liang. He served as the village's party secretary in the early years of the PRC. Every year, on the 16th day of the new Chinese year, Mr. Liang gets up early and puts on a suit. For some, getting up early and putting on a suit is nothing out of the ordinary. But Mr. Liang says he only wears this suit once a year. As he's putting it on, he calls out to his wife, who's busy cooking. It's only then that we can see this is no ordinary suit. It's a gown, and he needs his wife's help to put it on. It's the type of gown scholars wore until the early years of the Republic of China, a rather strange choice when you consider that Mr. Liang has toiled in the fields most of his life. But when he's finished putting it on, it seems like the most natural thing in the world. Mr. Liang says it was tailor-made for him, and he's right. It suits him down to the ground. The village is festooned with festive red lanterns. On a day like this, so much red is a welcome sight. It's almost possible to forget that it's 10 degrees below freezing. But the question remains, why is the 16th day of the Chinese year so special for the people of Underwillow Village?
正月16，算这个巧饭节。就是从那时候开始，定为巧饭节，连巧饭，这县志上查，这个连巧饭这个已经是180年了。
But what's it all about? When the film crew arrive at the village square, Mr. Liang points to some pictures and begins his tale, the amazing story of the bird banquet.
就是有2户姓金和姓胡的，他们逃荒要饭也好，就走到这儿了。种地呢需要种子，他没种子怎么办呢？这2家去人呢就很远去淘种子去了。淘了回来种子吧，来了一场大风，刮大风把他这个淘的种子吧，那袋子什么的给刮翻了。刮翻以后这个袋子种子呢都刮到这个石缝子里去了。这2个人着急了，赶紧的就去抠来出找，那个石缝里伸不进手，就着急。正在着急的时候吧，说那边呢，飞过一群鸟，落这儿以后他就把这个种子都顺着石缝子里头，他给倒出来了，搁到这俩人的这个面前了。倒出以后，人家没吃，倒完了，这群鸟就走了，飞走了。这俩人呢，这个就连忙磕头，哎呦，这是神鸟，谢谢这个神鸟吧。他就说了，说我们呢来年种地了，种出了粮食，我们丰收了，不忘你们这个巧神的恩情，我们一定要回报。
Suddenly, there's uproar in the square. The ceremony is about to begin. It's a truly amazing gathering. There's musicians, dancers, magicians, and parades. A group of young girls are dancing in the square. The crew are not the only ones to notice their colourful costumes and lively dance moves. The attention of most of the villagers' other visitors are also focused on them. Mr. Liang says that this dance symbolises friendship between men and birds. The village of Underwillow lies in an arm of the Yan Mountains north of Huairou. Surrounded by mountains and forests, it's a rather remote place. However, it's a good place for birds. Perhaps this explains why the villagers feel such affection for these feathered friends.
这村有一条，你谁也好，不允许你打鸟。像那个过去说掏巧，树有窟窿，什么你哪有这个，他要上那儿住去了，那垒窝住去，你要想害他，这是绝对不行的。尤其是老人对你不饶，骂你。
Maybe it's because the villagers see and hear birds every day. They know just how wonderful these creatures are from first-hand experience. The villagers do more than just leave the birds to their own devices. They look after them too. In winter, when food is scarce, the villagers feed them. The birds are cherished members of the village community.
假如说就是下了大雪了，尤其是去年那雪下的太大，那个过几天就下，过几天就下，这个鸟真是没得吃，就来这当院飞，尤其是起这个家巧，就把那个雪当院的雪扫那么一片，给瓤上这个小米、大米、谷子就给让它吃。
Mr. Liang shows the crew the statue of the huge flying bird that stands at the entrance to the village. It's yet more evidence of the abiding love the people of this village have for the birds. No wonder they throw an annual banquet for them.
大伙儿这么一研究说的，这个跟这个什么鸟吧，咱们今后同吃连巧饭，哎，就是你也做，我也做，哎，你这我也上你那儿敛粮食去，你也上我这儿敛粮食敛的菜做完了饭，做好了，先就让鸟吃，咱们呢给这个鸟神呢。 这个节日，定节日定多少呢？就是这个，就是这个今天，正月16巧饭节。
Before the villagers can get stuck into their feast, a ceremony in honor of the birds is in order.
现在拜鸟神。
This is exactly why Mr. Liang was changing into his gown early this cold and frosty morning. Mr. Liang bows before the statue of the giant flying bird that stands just in front of the village. Mr. Liang performs this ceremony every year on the 16th of the first lunar month. The meal prepared for the birds is a mixture of rice and other grains. It's made into a porridge for the people at the banquet, but the birds eat it uncooked. It's a way of saying thank you to the birds and showing solidarity with them.
这儿啊，一般是都说巧，实际就是鸟。
Although the banquet has been going for almost 200 years, the modern version, with its varied dances and performances, started in 2008 when Mr. Liang stepped onto the stage for the first time dressed in his robe.
做巧饭，生火点柴喽，生财气，点旺运，日子红红火火。媳妇们，水开了吗？水开下米喽，水开财源滚滚。 下米五谷丰登。
There's a diorama on display in the village that depicts the celebration being held today. It helps visitors understand the significance of the bird banquet to the people who live here. But Mr. Liang mentions that the bird banquet he knew as a boy was very different from the one held today.
就是我小时候，这个都是女人吃巧饭，大姑娘小媳妇啊去敛，这个什么老太太上年纪的老太太妇女，帮着这个孩子做，那时候只能是妇女女孩子做饭没经验，这是老太太。 还有这个成年妇女，帮着一块做一块吃。那时候，没有男孩子吃这一说。这男孩子他们做好了，人家吃，男孩子把那瞅着。有的那淘气那孩子吧，一着气不让吃，拿瓤把土，给他瓤把土就跑了。
But there's an inconsistency in what Mr. Liang has just told the crew. The county annals indicate that the bird banquet was originally cooked and eaten by the whole village. How then did the men come to be excluded? And apart from the prayers offered to the god of birds, are there any other rituals associated with the banquet? According to custom, the young girls of the village would visit every family to collect the ingredients for the bird banquet on the 15th. Each family has something different for the girls. Some give the best ingredients they have. Others, keen to give them new things to try, offer them something new or different. This is actually the most meaningful aspect of the bird banquet. It's about goodwill. The spirit in which the food is offered is far more valuable than the food itself.
你也拿，我也拿，到那儿一坐，大伙儿一吃，就是全村团圆饭，全村都出来都干这事儿，他就都挺高兴的。
Mr. Liang explains why the ingredients of the bird banquet have to be gathered by young girls. It's because the banquet is like a reunion dinner for the whole village. It's both a reunion gathering representing harmony and happiness, and a sacred offering to the god of birds. Young girls have to do the gathering because they epitomize harmony, happiness, and purity. It's more than just a meal. But although that fills the crew in on some of the background to the tradition, it still leaves one question unanswered. Why, in the past, were the men excluded from the banquet? But then Mr. Liang tells us something that hints at what might have happened.
这个什么，这儿有个分驻所，有2个日本，他一瞅这儿有大锅，那个制造的，他带上他那翻译上这儿来了，问这是什么干活？那翻译就问咱们这儿，问那个老太太问是说怎么回事？他又跟他说了，那是他的回事啊。 那就开路吧，就走了。
When looking into the history of this area during the Japanese occupation, people can read a sorry tale of massacre and forced labor. There is, for example, the Longtan massacre and the deportation of the entire male population of Dashuiyu village. There's no direct evidence to suggest that anything like this happened in Underwillow. Nevertheless, it's hardly likely that the village weathered the brutal Japanese occupation unscathed. It could be that Mr. Liang's early memories of the bird banquet are coloured by something that happened in that dark time. Maybe he remembers a time when only women and young children were left in the village. It could be that it became a women-only affair because all the men were dead, slaving for the Japanese, or indeed fighting them. It was not until the post-war period allowed the menfolk to return that the banquet reassumed its original form. It's just an idea. People don't know for sure. Nevertheless, what's certain is that the bird banquet has witnessed a lot in its 200-year history. The 16th dawns. The villagers of Underwillow have already begun to cook. But today's bird banquet is not just for the villagers. Visitors, in much the same way that people elsewhere put lucky coins into dumplings at Chinese New Year.
那时候叫制钱儿，那个现在没有制钱了，就是硬币，那个针线，这个顶针儿。 这个到时候做饭，把那个下上米，把那个来了一个，这就是吃小饭的时候，谁要吃着针线呐、顶针啊，那姑娘媳妇就高兴了，心灵手巧，那就高兴。 要是持着硬币，这也高兴，说这哎呦，你看看我这一年好运，要发财。
Mr. Liang believes that although today's bird banquet is tastier and more varied than the ones he remembers from his childhood, he misses the authenticity of the old-time simple banquet.
说是有什么好吃的端去，那个什么呢，把桌子都放到外头，这个会喝酒的拿上酒瓶子，这就喝。
Who knows how much history this fascinating custom has witnessed during its 200 years? It's hard to imagine what it's been through and how it's changed through the years.
国民党时期、日本时期、3年困难时期，什么文化大革命，这连条饭一直没断，延续到现在。
On the 16th day of the first lunar month, tourists from all over the country come here just to experience the famous bird banquet. It doesn't just last one day though. The revelries continue for more than 3 days. This year, thousands of visitors have flocked to the village. And with each bowl of bird banquet costing 20 yuan, the village is looking at a windfall of 200,000 or 300,000 yuan this festival. The whole village is keen to make it a success. Underwillow is a rather isolated place. Transportation isn't good, and as a result, the people here have learnt to depend on themselves. Life has never been easy here. For most of the village's history, they lived a simple life growing corn and sorghum. Yet it seems that tradition is like an investment. In the fullness of time, it pays you back with interest. Who would have imagined that the village would reap so much from this one simple meal? For the villagers of Underwillow, the bird banquet is as significant as the Chinese New Year dinner. It's much more than a family reunion. It brings together a whole community. Just as people all over China celebrate the new year regardless of their fortunes in the year just gone, so the people of Underwillow offer the bird banquet whether they've had a good harvest or not. In the tradition of the bird banquet.